Live from the recording studios in Boulder, Colorado. Welcome to the House Einstein podcast. This is House Einstein podcast 56, and I am Osman Parvez, your host, realtor based here in Boulder, and founder of House Einstein. And with me is Hamish Crabb.
Hello, I'm Hamish Crabb. Help with the podcast and the team at House Einstein. I'd say co-host. I'm going to take that title.
I'm totally fine. You can be co-host. You can be grand host. All right, so today we are going to be talking about a variety of things. But before we begin, let me remind our listeners that even though our mission at House Einstein is to help you make a smarter real estate decision, our mission in this podcast is to entertain you. And this is not to be taken as real estate advice or spiritual or relationship advice or financial advice, and that's what our attorneys require us to say. If you are a client of House Einstein and you want advice on your specific real estate situation, pick up the phone and call your House Einstein agent. And if you are shopping agents, you can find us at houseeinstein.com. And our bio, we already covered a little bit, although I suppose we should elaborate a little more. I've been doing this for over 20 years and have an investment background prior to jumping into the real estate world, and happy to, we could throw a link if somebody wants to see my bio. And Hamish, You have now been licensed for 3 years? Are you coming? You're
going
past
on
3
three,
years.
I think.
Yeah. And of course also have a background in videography and photography, and jack of all trades, master of some.
Well, yeah, I'll take that. That's really kind. Apparently the full saying is jack of all trades is oftentimes better than a master of one. Apparently, so I'll take it. I'm wearing the lumberjack plaid today, so. But no, I have a kind of big passion for videography. It extends. I'm mastering the photography aspect, and then have actually also kind of my entire life had some sort of real estate link here and there. So pretty happy to be in this position and be working with the House Einstein team, 100%.
And we are very happy to have you. Topics today. We are going to talk about... Well, this is the segment we like to call Tell Me Something I Don't Know. And we're going to talk a little bit about development in Table Mesa, in Newlands, in Central Boulder, particularly luxury home development or redevelopment. And we're also going to expand on a topic that we touched on last week, which was First Street and how they are now assigning climate risk scores. We're also going to touch base on something that's happening right now. We're recording this on Wednesday, October 9th, and Hurricane Milton. Milton
is a bad nickname.
Is about to slam into Florida, and it is currently Category 5. It will probably drop to Category 3 as it expands in size, and it's aimed right at Tampa. And so the topic, we talked about climate risk last week, but we're going to touch on, we're going to sort of strum on the idea of, well, if they're not moving to Florida, where are snowbirds going to move? Where are they migrating if they're not migrating to Florida? So that is our last topic for Tell Me Something I Don't Know. And then we'll jump to market conditions. In market conditions, we'll talk about the September data release and what's happening in Boulder County and the city of Boulder. And of course, our real estate brokerage does cover Denver and all of the L's in Boulder County: Louisville, Lafayette, Longmont, Louisville. Did I say Louisville twice? I think I did. And we also go as far north as Fort Collins, and we're into the mountain towns as well, and some of the resort towns. But we'll just touch base on City of Boulder data because it's our fair city, and it's a market we know and love, and we want to give you some information you might not find anywhere else. We're going to talk a little bit about how the fourth quarter is lowball season and what to expect if you are a buyer and a seller in the fourth quarter. We're going to touch a little bit in the next segment, which we call shameless self-promotion, about open houses and how they're back and how our business is shifting because of the changes in the commission rules, the rules for not the real estate commission, but the commission compensation rules for real estate agents. I should be clear about that. Then we've got 5 sales of the week we'd like to cover for you, and then we've got some exciting news. And then if you're still with us at the end, we're going to talk a little bit about the Carveouts. And Carveouts is a new segment that we've added that may or may not have anything to do with real estate, but are top of mind for us. Other things that we're currently thinking about, working on, reading, watching, and that sort of thing. So that is our table of contents. Thank you for joining us, and here we go.
This podcast is sponsored by House Einstein. We're a real estate brokerage based in Boulder, Colorado. Our market footprint covers Denver to Fort Collins and several mountain resort towns, including Breckenridge and Winter Park. Our goal at House Einstein is to help you make a smarter real estate decision. You can learn more at houseeinstein.com or our YouTube channel, where you'll find videos on neighborhoods, specific listings, and much, much more.
All right, let's jump into Tell Me Something I Don't Know. And if you were to drive around the city of Boulder, you will immediately notice that there are certain neighborhoods, certain locations where buyers have acquired older homes and they have redeveloped them. In some cases, they've scraped the house entirely and started over. And as you probably know, Boulder is a primary home market, not a secondary home market for most of our buyers that are acquiring homes here. Occasionally we do sell second homes, luxury second homes. Sometimes it's not a second, it might be a third, fourth, or fifth home to a buyer. But it's not Aspen and it's not Nantucket. It's a different type of motivation to acquire a home here in Boulder, and usually it's their primary home. And often buyers are coming from out of state, although sometimes they are based here, and they decide that they want to build a dream home. And they go through a selection process to figure out what's the best location, what are they looking for. And as you drive around our fair city, you're going to notice that there are pockets where there's a lot of this redevelopment. And there are areas where there's not much at all going on. And so I thought it might be helpful to call out a few neighborhoods. We're not going to cover every single pocket in Boulder, but to call out a few and talk about why we're seeing that sort of development in that particular location and not in others that might be nearby. So let's jump to Table Mesa. Table Mesa is a neighborhood in South Boulder. It was developed after Martin Acres. I think we're talking about mostly 70s era construction. And it was a variety of home types, everything from your basic single family ranch that's about 1,000 square feet to 1,200 square feet, no basement, to homes that are 3,000, 4,000, and 5,000 square feet. Usually you don't see things that are much larger than that. There is some geographic stuff to think about in terms of how the neighborhoods are laid out. And by the way, I'm talking about greater Table Mesa, not just Table Mesa proper. I'm including Kohler Mesa in that. And I'm including Devil's Thumb and Shanahan Ridge. And what you see, if you were to, for example, drive along Kohler Drive, you will see some enormous mansions being built. I'm not sure what else to call them. Private homes.
Compounds, but it doesn't quite fit compound, right?
They're not McMansions. These are beautifully designed by architects. They are trophy homes. I don't know their actual square footage, but they are perceived as pretty large. And they often are modern with a lot of glass. And the reason they're choosing that location is because you're on a bit of a perch. And it allows for views as well as, in some cases, your own backyard access to open space. And that's really something special. So when you look at why these home buyers have chosen these spots, there's a sense of spaciousness from the other homes. There's certainly a sense of exclusivity. And this is true anywhere in the world. Affluent home buyers and home builders prefer to be up, not down. They prefer to look down on the city below them. And some of these neighborhoods give you both the ability to look down on your neighbors, figuratively and
Literally.
and actually, right?
Yeah.
Like you actually are looking down on your neighbors, but in some cases you actually get views of lakes, parks, and sometimes the Flatirons. And in addition to actually having that physical proximity to open space and trails. So that's why you see them choosing these spots. And Kohler Mesa is probably the current hotbed of redevelopment. For a while, Devil's Thumb really was seeing a ton of stuff.
Yeah.
And then that seemed to have cooled. And it also, I think the reason it largely cooled has to do with rates. And the people at the higher end of the high end, right? Like the top 1% buyer, and I don't mean that in a political sense. I just mean the top buyers in the 1% category. They're not affected by rates, and they're often moving capital from one asset class to another. And they can be very patient looking for the right lot, and making sure it's the spot where they want to build their dream home. They've also chosen their architect sometimes years in advance. They've got their team in place. That's the smart way to do it. The wrong way to do it is to trust your real estate agent, who probably knows nothing about all the rules that govern what can be built and cannot be built. And yes, okay, so let me back up. House Einstein agents do know a lot, but your average agent does not. I feel like I know enough to be dangerous, having guided so many buyers in this decision process, but most agents have not. And so so we see people buy homes, and we'll talk about this actually in our sales of the week, where they think this is the right lot, this is the right property, and then they meet with their architects, and then they meet with builders, and they realize that this is not the right lot, this is not the right starter property, this home does not have the right bones, they can't build what they want, and then it's back on the market within 6 months. So be careful out there if you are thinking about taking on this type of projects. Buyers are looking for that view corridor, that sense of exclusivity, that space from neighbors, and this market is driven, I think it has a parallel with the stock market and the economy in general. When people are feeling flush, they often undertake these projects, and when the economy is struggling, which it has been a while since it has, but when we are in recession, that's when buyers are less likely to take on development. And that, by the way, is also a great time to find the architect, find the builder, and begin your project, because suddenly they're available and their rates are far less expensive. So it's one of those counter-cyclical things that if you have the affluence to be able to take on this project, you might be better off doing it during a down market than an up market. And what does the future look like? So this is an interesting time in Boulder real estate. We're seeing elevated inventory. We're seeing slower than typical market conditions across the board, but they're starting to wake up again as rates have turned the corner, have swung the pendulum, take your cliche. And Boulder real estate historically has been one of the safest real estate markets in the country. And people move here for quality of life. They move here because there are people here that share their values, not necessarily politically or religiously, but in terms of outdoor recreation, in terms of cycling, in terms of
lifestyle.
A lifestyle choice,
Yeah.
right? And we have fantastic weather, an amazing research university, a major airport hub within an hour, and politics that agree with the people typically that move here. And so I don't think those are likely to change anytime soon. And when you come up with your list of amazing communities to live in that also have a great startup ecosystem, for example, there aren't a lot that have what Boulder has. And I don't think those fundamentals will change anytime in the near term. So when you acquire a property in a place like Kohler Mesa, and by the way, we have a listing. I didn't even think about that. We have a listing on Kohler Drive. It's not going to hit the market until probably next spring, but that listing actually is a great lot if you're thinking about building in the future. And the home, so one of the things that buyers are looking for are homes that can be substantially deconstructed or demoed, and that will not be subject to excessive historic review. And one of the easiest things you can do is avoid buying something that was built before the war. And by the war, I mean World War II. So older than 1945 will get a lot more scrutiny from historic review, and stuff that's mid-century and newer, 1950s and newer, still is subject to historic review, by the way, because it's older than 50 years. But that review is much more superficial, and you're far less likely to find an unpleasant surprise that throws your whole project.
Right. Yeah, that Kohler Drive listing, I wasn't sure if we were going to mention it, but, we talk about kind of like perches and the different topographies and locations in Table Mesa. Devil's Thumb's, kind of funny because it almost like abuts that open space. But then Kohler Drive has its own kind of private open space. There's like little different pockets within Table Mesa that have their own perks and benefits to them. Yeah.
Well, thank you for bringing up Table Mesa.
Table.
As Mesa.
Yep.
And it always cracks me up that the city of Boulder is regarded as one of the smartest communities in our country due to the number of PhDs, graduate students, people with graduate degrees that live here. Mm-hmm. And yet we have a neighborhood that is called Table Mesa, and it's not changing.
Everybody's just going with it.
There's no push to change it, but it's embarrassing as a name for a neighborhood. So let's jump to a couple of other spots. So we talked pretty extensively about Kohler Mesa and Table Mesa. Let's switch to Newlands. And Newlands is a really fascinating neighborhood, but it's much more constrained by development-oriented buyers because the lot sizes are much smaller, and most of those lots are also east-west oriented. Back in 2005, there was a push for a new ordinance called compatible development. And Newlands was ground zero for owners in that neighborhood who were very upset with new wealth coming into the neighborhood and tearing down the house and building a new modern home that they felt was out of character and too big for these small lots. And so there was organized efforts to put in place this compatible development ordinance, and it passed. And so there are a smattering of big houses on small lots in Newlands, but the vast majority of those were built before the compatible development ordinance passed. And you still see redevelopment, but the scale is much smaller in Newlands. But just north of Newlands, on let me get a map, Juniper, and
that's not Wonderland, is it?
Wonderland's its own thing too.
Yeah.
So this is just a pocket of streets. Wonderland has larger lots, and a lot of those lots are not east-west. So east-west and north-south is something I should talk about for a second. So everyone has heard that south-facing lots are more attractive, south-facing houses. The driveway melts, but the driveway melting is really the tip of the iceberg because south-facing homes get better light inside. They look more light inside, and they also are better for active and passive solar. So passive solar is hardscape that heats up through the glass front of the home and then retains that heat in the winter. And active solar, of course, everyone knows what that is, solar panels on the roof. And when you have south-facing surfaces on your roof, it really helps you get the gain you need to have a large solar array. But just north of Newlands is Iris, Juniper, Kalmia, and really Linden too. And these lots are all north-south oriented and much larger. So when you look at redevelopment, you see a ton of activity with some very luxurious homes now in excess of $10 million list prices on Juniper and Kalmia in particular. Those two streets, and you can see it on Google Maps. I'm not trying to invade anybody's privacy, but that's where you see these trophy homes that were constructed. Yeah. And you don't see them as the trophy size. You won't see as much in Newlands, although you do see some very, very nice homes. The nicest ones typically are on the west side, like west of 5th Street. And we did sell one of those 2 years ago. I still need to go for a mountain bike ride. That's sort of embarrassing for the buyer. We dropped the ball entirely. So that is a location that's worth considering. And I guess I'm going to pitch our listing since we're talking about all the things that make this particular listing worthwhile. Yeah. So if you pull up Zillow
case study, right?
Yeah, or pull up a link that's in our show notes to 605 Alpine, and this is a 1950s era house, so it's not subject to the historic review standards of homes built in the 40s, and it's north-south facing. And it's a box-on-a-box design. It's a single-story ranch with a full basement and a 2-car detached garage. And it virtually backs to North Boulder Park through the backyard. And it's super private, unlike a lot of Newlands that east-west oriented that are not private.
Yeah.
And so this is a pretty good candidate for, I think, of sort of a more modest redevelopment. Certainly not a trophy home size, but a home that would suit the majority of buyers. Probably something more like 3,500 square feet to 4,500 square feet. And of course, I'm not saying you can absolutely do that because there's a lot of rules. Setbacks is your first layer. North-south oriented, of course, but also because the shadows are cast smaller when the sun is hitting these houses that are facing south or north. They cast less shadow on the neighbors, and Boulder does have a solar access ordinance that limits house sizes as well. So all of these things come into play, and of course, lot size is a big deal too. When you're thinking about what is your target, if you're
your square footage, whether you're building, right? Yeah,
whether you're building right away or you're building in 5 years, knowing these basic constraints are really important. Lot size, lot orientation, setbacks, other local zoning factors that might come into play. And remember, you don't always buy your view, and your neighbor might have the right to block your view. So that is always something to think about when you're putting a dollar on the value of the view.
Yeah.
Okay, so that is, I think that covers, Hamish,
I think so.
our topic du jour of what drives this. So we talked about Newlands, we talked about Table Mesa. There's a couple of other neighborhoods, like there's one just north of, just south of Growing Gardens, just south and east. Oh. So it's basically north of Alpine Modern, right? There's a couple of streets there that have seen a whole bunch of...
Yeah, the kind of Chautauqua neighborhood.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean Alpine Modern. I meant Ideal Market. Just north of Ideal Market. There's a little hotbed of a couple of streets there where we've also seen a lot of mid-market redevelopment. So again, not these $10 million Juniper Kalmia-sized developments, but more like a home that ends up in the $3.5 million range and might be 3,500 square feet. Oh, that is my alarm, and I need to go pause this for a moment. But I think we covered this initial segment, and then I need to take a quick momentary break, and then we'll jump in with First Street and climate risk scores.
Perfect.
So let's talk about First Street. Last week, we told you that Zillow had announced they will start using First Street climate data, climate risk score data on their listings. And it wasn't clear if that was all listings or just the ones that are actively for sale. But it led me down the rabbit hole to see what First Street had to offer as an organization and how they were approaching their climate risk modeling. And so I pulled up a bunch of properties that I have a connection to. And I'm not going to give you the specific addresses, although I'll give you the cities, and share with you what I found in their reporting. So you can go to firststreet.org and do this for yourself. You can sign up for a free 7-day trial. I have, and House Einstein has no business relationship with First Street, so we're not benefiting. There's
non-sponsored.
It's not sponsored. There's no affiliate link. But I think this is, if you're concerned with climate risk and real estate, I think it's worthwhile to go ahead and download reports for your properties and see what you can learn and think about how they are evaluating residential real estate for climate risk, climate change risk. And Hamish, did you do that for yours? Did you?
No, I didn't, and I was kind of bummed I didn't put in the request for you. I missed that on the team chat.
Sorry about that.
I would have had you do South Dakota too, my uncle's neck of the woods, because I'm curious if it's going to match up with what you're about to share.
Well, I guess I mean you can sign up for an account.
And not right now. I'm not going to type.
Not during the podcast. All right. Yeah. So the first property is just north of Tampa. This is a property my parents own in a little town called Land O'Lakes, and it's a newer house in a little subdivision. And I kind of expected it to show hurricane risk, right?
Yeah.
And of course,
especially top of mind.
speaking right now, Hurricane Milton is on its way and will be hitting tonight. And by the time you hear this podcast, we'll know how badly it devastated Florida and where it devastated. But this particular property was rated as 3 out of 10 for flood, 5 out of 10 for fire, 9 out of 10 for wind, 3 out of 10 for air, and 10 out of 10 for heat. So those are the factors that they are assigning risk scores on. They also give you data like how many historic floods have been recorded in the area and how many pollution facilities are tracked by the EPA within 30 miles. And due to that, this property ranks in the top 75% in the state of Florida for poor air quality. And I guess I'm surprised by the fire factor, but I guess Florida does have wildfires.
Yeah.
And I'm not surprised at all by the wind, right? That is the hurricane-driven event, right? Flood is relatively low. This is an inland property, even though there's lots of water around it, by the way.
I always thought Florida was just a wetlands, the entire thing, but...
It's a land of sinkholes and wetlands, and
snakes.
When I was in the environmental world, I was told that Florida really is, the Everglades are a giant slow-moving river, and the environment there has just been completely devastated by development. But that's a whole other topic. But what surprised me, though, was that even though it has all these large ponds in the subdivision, the flood factor was only 3 out of 10, and the fire factor was higher, 5 out of 10. The wind factor, not a surprise. The air quality, 3 out of 10. And then 10 out of 10 for heat. And the heat thing, well, I mean, you're getting close to the equator, and it's hotter and humid, and therefore you become much more dependent on air conditioning.
Yeah.
Particularly in the summer months. This is a seasonal property for my family. And what's fascinating is the First Street will give you like regional maps as well, so you could see how fire and flood regionally affect the area. So, and it will also assign the risk score of being in a wildfire over the next 30 years. So this property, this year has a 0.1% chance of being in a wildfire, but over the next 30 years is assigned a 3.6% chance.
Yeah, so like for the heat being 10 out of 10, I'm kind of more curious about that. Is that like over the next 30 years it's going to become a heat problem, or kind of does it expand on that?
I don't know if they give you specifics. Let me look on the heat thing. I think they're mostly talking about just livability and the cost that you're going to incur, which is a little bit unfortunate because it doesn't cover things like the complete death of wildlife, right? Like there's certain areas...
Or the loss of habitat, right?
Habitat loss, and the fact that animals they don't air condition their spaces. And already we're seeing news articles from climate change about animals falling out of trees as they die because they just can't handle the heat. So, they really are focused on cooling costs, and they say this year it's $800 to cool this property every year. And the average cooling degree days, I don't exactly understand what they're getting at, but they say that in 30 years, the cost is going to be $853, which I think is sort of trivial difference in cost. And I wonder if I don't think this is not inflation adjusted, for sure. It's not inflation adjusted. So... it gives you some heat trends, like the number of days that can exceed 100 degrees. And 30 years ago, it was 146 days for this property. This year, it's 168 days. And then in 30 years, they're saying it's going to be 185 days that are under health caution. Sorry, I was giving you health caution.
Oh.
The dangerous, above 100 degrees, there were only 32 days 32 years ago. This year there's 71, so it's more than doubled in 30 years, the number of days that are dangerous over 100 degrees.
Okay.
And then in 30 years it goes to 106.
Okay. That tracks.
There we go. Yeah. And I'm not going to share this report with you because it has my parents' address, but you can easily go pull up your own properties or areas you are looking to invest and see how it plays out. Let's switch to a different market, and we'll talk about right here in the mountains of Boulder and my own property. And I'm not going to share the address, although certainly it's easy enough for people to figure out where I live. But I'll read you the flood, fire, wind, and air quality factors. They did not give a heat factor for this property. So 1 out of 10 for flood. No surprise, I'm in the mountains and we have a pretty nice view. We're elevated. But 9 out of 10 for fire. 1 out of 10 for wind, which is kind of interesting because I think they're wrong. We have had 80, almost 90 mile an hour wind gusts up here. I have a cargo trailer. It's an aluminum cargo trailer. I have it chained to the ground with hurricane anchors because it's so light. And it's not attached to a vehicle and doesn't have brakes, and I don't want it flying off the side of the mountain.
Huge profile too, yeah.
And we've had days when it's 70 and 80 mile an hour winds, like we're nervous to open the garage door and take a car out to leave because I'm worried the windows and the skylights are going to blow out of the garage because we opened that door.
It's so direct. It's so direct, right?
So but they've only assigned 1 out of 10, and they've assigned a 2 out of 10 for air quality. And we are 2,000 feet above the city of Boulder, so we often see the haze down below. And I think about that quite often, that we are lucky enough to be in a property that has far better air quality. And if we were to move... Sorry, go ahead, Heyman.
Do you have like a weather station, the little like hobbyist kits or something at your place so you can see the wind and all that?
I don't, but there's a house right across the canyon over on Sunshine, and I could see the house, and they have a weather station. And so I just pull up their data.
Oh, nice. Cheap. Saves the trouble.
I mean, we should, right? We should actually put up a little weather station. And in fact, I think the previous owner, put up a little pole in the yard, 2 different locations actually for weather stations. He was a scientist and is a scientist, engineer, and track that sort of data. But I don't know. The nerd in me has not done that yet. So let's talk about fire risk here for a minute. So this property has a 5.5% chance of being destroyed by wildfires over the next 30 years. There are 12 pollution facilities tracked by the EPA within 30 miles, and this property has significant fire insurance considerations. Absolutely true. We have struggled with insurance. We now have pretty solid insurance, but it's something I think a lot about. And the risk of being in a wildfire, so this is not saying destroyed by a wildfire, this is just saying in a wildfire, 2.1%. Sorry?
They're like impacted by a wildfire, well, not destroyed.
The language they're using is just being in a wildfire. And it could be a low-intensity event like a brush fire, they say. And so 2.1% this year, 33% chance of being in a wildfire over the next 15 years, and almost a 60%, 59% chance in the next 30 years of being in a fire. And there have been 17 wildfires recorded within 20 miles of this property, including controlled burns. And that is the 4 Mile Fire, the Sunnyside Fire, the Old Stage Fire, the El Dorado Fire. There's a bunch of fires in the 80s that I didn't even know about. The Calwood Fire in 2020. And they listed the NCAR Fire. It's only 7 miles away, so they listed that one too. And then, of course, the Marshall Fire that everyone knows about that happened in 2021 in December that impacted almost 3,000 properties were impacted. I can't remember the number that were actually destroyed. So, all right, so that is up here in the mountains. And then I pulled up my parents' primary home because they've had it on the market for sale. I've actually thought about buying it from them because it's such a climate risk hedge. And I never knew the actual modeling numbers on how I just knew that it's in a location that is surrounded by a deciduous forest. It rains, it's damp, and I can't remember a single wildfire growing up anywhere nearby. And it's sort of unpopulated. It backs to state forest. It has a pond.
I think it's
that is spring fed. It's also very close to an airport, the Elmira Corning Regional Airport. So this property is in Catlin, New York, and it is a 15-minute drive to that regional airport, and it's very close to Corning, Elmira, Watkins Glen. So the property has a 1 in 10 chance of 1 in 10 rating for flood, 1 in 10 rating for fire, 1 in 10 rating for wind, 2 out of 10 for air quality, and 1 in 10 for heat. So the only one that nudged off of the one was air quality. And it says there are... Sorry.
Go for it. Go for it.
There are 3 pollution facilities tracked by the EPA within 30 miles, and over 30 years, this property has minimal risk for flood, wildfire, and heat.
Pretty dang good odds, especially comparing like where you are now. That's what I was thinking. I would think South Dakota would land pretty similarly, at least out where my uncle was. But you know what I'm not seeing there is like snowfall, and maybe snowfall isn't necessarily catastrophic or super indicative, but upstate gets some decent snow.
Well, the irony is that people think Colorado and Boulder in particular is like The Shining.
Yeah.
You need a snowcat to get around. And upstate got less snow than we get up here where I live, but my parents' house in particular. But it's a different experience in the winter. Mm-hmm. So winter in upstate New York is a gray cloud that hangs over, and the temperatures on average are about 10 degrees colder. And the snow is not a light, fluffy thing. It's like
hangs around too, doesn't it?
It hangs around. It gets icy and layers on everything, and it's heavy. It's not a light, fluffy powder typically. Mm-hmm. But unlike Colorado, New York State takes snow and ice removal pretty darn seriously, and most of the roads are plowed and salted. Unlike Boulder, that doesn't.
Putting it lightly. No, we're on the topic of it. Wasn't Utah just like attacked last year with snow? I think there was like somewhere in Utah that got like snow up to the roofs of houses. There were people tunneling.
Yeah, I mean there are places in upstate that gets that too, like lake effect snow. But I don't know. It's sort of an anomaly. I think there was also like Wolf Creek Pass got a ton of snow last year. I mean, it seems to be kind of... Yeah, I mean, there are definitely places that get that, Hamish. Mm-hmm. The thing that I think most people don't know when it comes to City of Boulder real estate, so we'll segue back to that, is that it is well known which streets get plowed and which streets don't. There's a map, and it should be part of your basic due diligence if you're buying a property in Boulder, period. It's super easy. And if your agent doesn't mention it, get a better agent, because you may want to think about that if you live on a steeply sloped road that's not going to get salted or plowed, or might get some, sprinkle of salt in the corners, if at best. And we've sold homes. One of our closest friends bought a house and thought it would be fine, and his road is so steep that he's joked about getting lawn chairs out when it snows.
Oh, just to watch people?
To watch the spectacle of car crashes right in front of his house.
Yeah.
Because it's so steep, and yet the city does nothing about it.
Yep. Interesting strategy we have on snow removal here in Colorado.
Yeah.
I was really stoked to see... Or go ahead.
It's called the sun.
Yep. And it's dang effective. For the most part, snow doesn't stick around. If you're an out-of-state listener... it's pretty uncommon for snow to stick around more than, say, 2 days after a big fall, on the roads, that is. But I was really stoked to see after I bought this place. We have plows come through the street, and it gets taken care of actually relatively quickly, all things considered. Yeah, got lucky. I did not due diligence that one.
All right, let's move on. So I was going to read about one more property, but I think we can skip it. But you get the point that these reports are available. These are the criteria that investors and others are now going to start focusing on when it comes to climate change risk and residential real estate. And you may want to consider it as well if you're making your own real estate plans to buy or sell. And most of Boulder County is high risk, but the mountains are extreme risk. And it's something we live with day in and day out. But the trade-offs might be worth it. And honestly, we talk about it quite frequently because the sense of living in the mountains is so spiritually rejuvenating. The wildlife, the sunsets, the sunrises,
privacy,
the dirt trail right out your front door. It is It is really a lovely experience living in the mountains. And we also don't have a long commute. It takes me less than 20 minutes, 16 minutes typically, to get right down to Pearl Street. It's just not an easy bike ride home.
Quicker than me from Westminster to downtown.
Thank God for e-bikes. But there's also the quality of the drive, too, is quite pleasant versus driving the diagonal or US 36 and back-to-back traffic is miserable.
Yeah.
So that's something to think about, too. All right. Next segment.
Tell me something.
Final thing about what you don't know. Last piece of this, and that, what does the future look like? So across the social media real estate world, the real estate Twitter, the Reddit segment on real estate, not the Reddit Twitter, the Reddit subreddit on real estate, there's a lot of discussion happening right now about Florida real estate and what's going to happen in the future and what is going to occur to long-standing patterns. There was an article in the Wall Street Journal about how this may be disrupting a very long-standing pattern of people from the Northeast in particular, when they retire, looking to retire in Florida. And Florida is certainly very senior-friendly, and when it's not in hurricane season, the winters are really lovely in Florida. The summers can get really hot and uncomfortable, but not so bad on the coasts. Definitely uncomfortable inland. But where are people going to go if not Florida? And how should we as real estate investors and real estate participants that help buyers and sellers think about this?
Well, good pause on the spot. I think it's going to come down to kind of, what are you looking for? And if I were to quickly punch list Florida, I'd say, you have the ocean, you have somewhat moderate temperatures and generally decent weather, as I'm watching Milton arrive. So you'd be looking at somewhere kind of that ticks that box, and I'd be thinking a little bit future forward myself. So maybe somewhere where the climate isn't exactly warm enough right now, but it's kind of leaning in that direction. And Florida also has kind of that tax incentive to it. Without going political on it, but I've always been thinking, and it's getting more popular, but the Pacific Northwest kind of starts to look pretty nice to me personally, and that's my bet. But I think as storms continue to ravage Florida, and then the insurance increase and everything, it's gonna start looking a little bit less favorable. Miami has a ton of billionaires in it, and a ton of new developments still going on. So I'm kind of curious to see when that's going to shift, if that ever does, as well.
Well, I did pull up a First Street report for a friend that lives in a neighborhood in Miami, and I was surprised. It did not look like his house was as exposed as the west coast of Florida to climate change risk. But I agree with you, Hamish. The tax incentive is a big deal. Mm-hmm. And I think that people are going to continue to retire in places where they are an easy flight to their families so they can see the grandkids.
Didn't even think of that, right? Proximity, right. Yeah.
They're going to also want to be in places that are warmer and that are not as tax disadvantaged as the Northeast. So where are they going to go? I think Arizona, even though there's high fire risk and poor air quality issues. New Mexico, perhaps, even though I think that's even more exposed to extreme heat. But it looks like the heat issues from a cost perspective are tolerable, at least in the reports we've seen. So we've certainly had our own share of people moving here, but Colorado winters are cold. And as people get older, there's a cliche, and I can now relate that this cliche is true, you feel the cold more. You feel the aches and pains and the kind of misery of shoveling and de-icing your car, and
chilled to
it
the
just
bone.
Doesn't. And you start to envision a tropical escape. You start to envision wearing very little clothing and walking on a beach and being comfortable. And Hawaii, for example, is one of the happiest states in the union. I think it is the happiest, and Colorado is number 2 for happiness. Hawaii is extremely expensive, although some of the islands are not that way, and there are a lot of local issues that relate to people that are not Hawaiian moving to Hawaii to retire. So I think that people are going to continue to move. I think that in a year we'll have a year where we don't have major hurricanes that savage Florida, or 2 years in a row, and people will have short-term memories.
Yeah.
But one thing's for sure, they will not have short-term memories when their insurance costs have gone up 4 times what it was only a few years ago. So that's going to put a damper on real estate prices. And certainly, I think that people will be looking at alternatives. And Colorado isn't a bad one, but January and February tend to be some pretty cold and icy months. And so we have a few people we know that leave. They are snowbirds during those months, and they go to places like the Caribbean for extended vacations and try to get to warmer climates for 4 to 6 weeks. Colorado also has, Boulder in particular, has one of the highest work from home rates in the country. So people can work remotely from a warmer climate, and I think they'll keep doing that. That trend is, I don't think climate change is going to stop it. I just think it's going to layer on a whole nother slew of choices, and people will focus on climate hardened homes. There's probably in fact, I'm sure there's a massive opportunity for new businesses to arise to help harden homes against fire risk, wind damage, flood damage. You probably never want to buy a house in the 100-year flood unless you are getting a commensurate trade-off like views or proximity to downtown. We've talked about that before. But I don't think that people are going to stop moving is what I'm trying to say. People are going to keep moving. It's just a question of what they're going to evaluate and whether they should never be caught by, like, hurricanes hitting Florida should not be a surprise.
Not anymore in the slightest, you know. And like you bring up the short-term memory thing. I think you're right on that. I think the cycle will continue for quite a while. You know, insurance is going to hurt, but yeah, we'll see.
Let's move on to market conditions.
Perfect.
Market conditions in the city of Boulder and Boulder County. And every month we do look at the data. And I am embarrassed that I've not had a newsletter out for a while. But that will change soon, dear readers, I promise. Thank you for your patience. Let's talk about market conditions. So I'm doing this live, and I don't have my full model out. I actually have a model that I built years ago that I use to track all of this data going back to 2005. And we're going to look at the number of closings. We're going to look at the median sale price. We'll talk about the inventory and the percentage of homes on the market. And we'll look at that and compare it to a year ago. And that's usually enough to give you a sense of what's happening. Although I will add that month over month and year over year is not enough data for a small market to establish a long-term trend. So you need more data than that. And that's one of the reasons why we look at multiple months of data. And if you are our client, we are incredibly happy to go down the analytical rabbit hole and show you charts and graphs and that are reflective of your specific real estate need, because Boulder County as a whole is also way too broad. And even if I just said City of Boulder, City of Boulder is way too broad. If you're looking in Newlands,
sample size issue too, don't you?
Yeah, you are in a sample size problem. So you should be looking specifically in the neighborhood down to the street level. But people want to know what's happening in the market, and so we'll go through it. And I'll even talk about price. So Boulder County, in the month of September, the median sale price was $765,000, and that's a decrease year over year of 7.2%. Last month it was $825,000, and that's a really big drop, right? $765,000. Oh, calculator doesn't work on this keyboard. Hang on a second.
And you're saying September over August, right?
No, 7.2% year over year.
Oh, right. Okay.
Right. So $765,000 was the median sale price this September, and a year ago, the median sale price in September of 2023 was $824,500. So basically the same number as last month, and that's a decrease of 7.2%. That's not indicative that all homes dropped 7.2%. That just means more lower priced homes sold, it's not necessarily indicative of a dollar per square change that is sustaining. There's a lot of volatility on a month-to-month basis. All right, if that doesn't make sense to you and you are thinking about buying or selling, and you are not signed up in an exclusive arrangement with another real estate agent, just pick up the phone. And I'm happy to walk through the data with you. I'm happy to give you the data as well for your own analysis, provided you're one of our clients. Okay, days on market, median for single-family houses. These are detached single-family houses in Boulder County last month. The median days on market was 46, so these are properties that actually closed. And that's up almost 18% year over year.
I believe
Last
that.
month, there were 229 sales, and that is basically the same number as a year ago. So down 0.4%, which is basically the same number as sales a year ago. And under contract. So this is, I think, a significant event. There were 268 single-family houses under contract countywide last month. That's an increase of almost 21% from a year ago. And when you look at the chart, and I look at, you can't quite see this, but I will provide a link. When you look at the last few years, let's look at a 5-year period, and you look at this time period from, let's say, July through December. Under contract, July through December, in 2019 dropped. 2020 I'm going to skip because it's a weird year, and we'll go right to 2021. In 2021, it dropped from July, I guess it rose slightly through September and then plummeted. And then last year we had, it peaked in May. This is the number of homes under contract. And then it had a little bit of a hiccup upward in August and then plunged the whole rest of the year. And then last year it dropped. It peaked again in May, the homes under contract, and dropped all the way through December. And this little anomaly of a August to September increase is kind of rare. It's not that common, and I think that's largely rate driven.
Yeah.
And it's 21% year over year increase. So the data is showing that, yes, the market responded to lowering rates, and there are more people suddenly in the market. But I think the real flood will be next year when and if rates are low or lower than they are now. I think we're going to see a lot more activity.
Yeah, a little bit more meaningful. They've definitely come down, but I think people are, for some reason, 5 is the number in everyone's head.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, a number that starts with 5.
Yeah, exactly.
So homes for sale, 860 houses on the market last month. That's a 17% increase year over year. And new listings down 4.1%. So, I mean, 4.1% is pretty much flatline, like not really much of a change. Mm-hmm. And I'll provide some links, Hamish.
Yeah, would you
probably
be able to
the one that
go like either screenshot or email to me now, or
I think what I'll do is I'll just dump it in the show notes right now. But I'm not going to do all of these because it's a lot of links, and these links aren't going to be forever links anyway. At some point, the MLS is going to turn them off. So I think the easiest thing to do is just let's do under contracts.
I think the one you said you would do too. Yeah.
Let's do closed sales, and I'll share a link for the last 5 years, and I'm gonna I just copy and paste it into the show notes for you. Ooh,
awesome.
Oh man, I've lost all screens. Okay, there it
went.
Oh no. Okay. And you'll see this being pasted right now into our tracking doc.
Much appreciated.
And that live link is interesting because you can actually roll your cursor over the data, and it has some interactivity. It's not just a static image.
Cool. All right.
We never shared those before because I kind of find them a little tedious. All right, let's move on to the city of Boulder. I think for the interest of time, I'm going to skip attached dwellings. Let's just do city of Boulder.
Of course, reach
again,
out.
Single-family houses.
Yeah.
So this does not include townhomes and condos. Yep. Reach out if you want the data. Or, I don't know, wait for the newsletter. Maybe it'll be in it. All right, let's start with sale prices of detached houses. Now, keep in mind, City of Boulder, much smaller than the county. And, of course, City of Boulder data is inclusive in the county. The median sale price was $1.155 last month. That's a decrease of 7.2%. And the days on market for closed listings, also 47. That's the median days on market, up 4.4%. Closed sales, there were 61 closed sales last month, and that's a decrease of almost 13% year over year. Pretty typical. Well, to see a decrease from
in this
July, August, September, we're dropping. That's a normal pattern. It's like a heartbeat. We're going to see that continue all the way to December when the market finally craters. Sometimes seasonally craters. Sometimes January is actually a little lower than December. That's actually not uncommon. So, for example, there were 2020 is a weird year. 2019, 74 sales in December, and January saw 43. So what that should tell you is you generally are not a good idea to go out in January as a new listing. It's a pretty dead market. 71 in 2021 December and 43 in January. So that's another thing to think about in the pattern. From this time, in summary, from this time of year to January is a slide down, and then the market starts to wake up again in February. All right, let's talk about under contract. 79 homes were under contract last month. That's up 10% year over year, 9.7% year over year. And then homes for sale. It has now 328 houses are for sale in the city of Boulder. That's an increase of 15% year over year. And earlier this year I was telling people we had a 71% increase year over year, but it seems to have mellowed out, or I'm wondering if my data was wrong. Although we had a particularly high September last year, 285.
And we've also may have seen a lot of withdrawals or expirations.
Yeah, I think that might have happened. But interestingly, when you look at this little heartbeat chart, and I'm going to share this one with you, cool, because this is one worth looking at and thinking about. It looks like September is often like a peak for inventory. Like selection seems to peak every year, like right around the fall. And that makes sense because people, they don't wait to the end of the year. They're like, forget it. We tried. We failed. Let's pull it off the market. And we're going to come back to that data point when we talk about how buyers and sellers should be thinking about the fourth quarter.
I'm also thinking because of school, right? When school comes back in full swing, they're like, all right, we're going to sit and pull our house off the market.
Yeah,
right around that.
We're staying another year. We're not going to move the kids mid-year.
Mm-hmm.
Although there's lots of people that don't have children. But it does seem like the cycle is very closely tied to the academic year.
Yeah.
And new listings, there were 125 in September. That's a decrease of 12.6% year over year. Yeah, interesting.
Lots of inventory. Yeah.
So that is our walk through the data for Boulder real estate. And if you're looking for Denver, or you want to get more granular in Boulder County and to Louisville or Lafayette or Longmont, well, I'm your boy. Give me a call. Don't if you are working with somebody else, call that person, please. Don't call me. I'm not interested in just helping you with the data, only to have you close with your cousin or whatever. That's I appreciate the call, but
it hurts too much.
It doesn't hurt. It's just,
no, I'm just kidding.
I mean, I don't know. When I first got into this business, I was happy to help anybody, whether or not you were my client. But now I'm very clear that if there's no opportunity for us to work together, call the person that you're paying.
Yeah. Makes sense.
They probably won't be able to give it to you, and I'm sorry. That's just life. You chose your representation. Okay, let's move on. So, Hamish, what is the fourth quarter?
Oh, it's the last 3 months of the year.
Oh, good. That's right. That's right. But it's also lowball season for real estate.
Oh, okay. So. Shoot. I was so teed up.
Lowball season is probably, I don't know, probably I shouldn't call it lowball season. It's a little rude, but it is reality. And when I represent buyers, I tell them that this is the best time of year in any given year for negotiating with sellers who have been on market all spring and summer and are now fed up with having their home not sold and they are willing to negotiate. In some cases, if it's an estate sale, and I hate to sound like a vulture over this, but if it's an estate sale or a distressed sale for some reason, they are willing to shave, in some cases take a significant loss on the sale of the house just to be done. And in particular with estate sales, the people that are selling it often are in line to inherit significant wealth, and they have a tax burden that needs to be paid. And this, let's say the home has, let's say it's $1 million home in Boulder, it's $1.5 million in Boulder, right? That was the median. Well, and it's spread across, let's say, 5 family members. I can assure you that 4 out of those 5 family members have already mentally spent the money. Yeah. Right, like they are.
The carrot is right in front of them. Right,
they're like, we're gonna go on vacation in Europe. We're gonna buy a new car. We're gonna pay off a bunch of debt. Whatever they're doing, and so they've mentally spent it, but they haven't gotten the money, and so they've been on hold, and they're unlikely to want to sign up for another year. So, if you are looking to aggressively shop for a deal, this is the time to do it, and you should be looking at not just stale listings, but listings where they have owned it for a really long time and they might be fed up. Now, with that, all of that said, and this is my strongest point to buyers, the best deal is not the best real estate situation for you and your family. Like, you can't live in an amazing deal if it's a train wreck of a house.
To work. Yeah,
you may want to consider the happiness of your family or the survival of your marriage in your real estate choices. But if you are looking for that aggressive low offer opportunity, choose homes that have been on the market a long time and that have been owned for a long time where there's significant equity. And if it's vacant, that's another sign. And this is the time of year, but you need to get it under contract typically before Thanksgiving and close it before the end of the year, because otherwise those sellers that remain or those that come back, they are more optimistic when the year turns.
A little rejuvenated, right?
They're hoping next year is better, and they're less likely to take a low offer than the fall. So what about sellers? So sellers, how do you think about the fourth quarter? And the most important thing for you to do is to continue to track the market with your agent's assistance. And by that, I mean the competition. You need to be deeply familiar with every competitor for your listing. You need to understand the underlying factors for supply and demand of your listing. And sometimes you have to wait for the right buyer. And that doesn't mean that you won't get lowballs. You probably will. And the key is to not be offended by the lowball. That hire an agent that will engage with people, because sometimes what happens is that you'll get a lowball, and in reality, they're just testing you on price, but they really want the house. So it's not a bad idea to counter with a reasonable counter, and don't get offended. You could choose to counter with a token discount from list, but that usually just kills the negotiation. So it's not necessarily that much better than just telling the person to take a hike and come back with a more serious offer. And that's, how to do that in a way that is not shutting down the conversation is really important. It's a little like dating. Maybe this is the wrong analogy. I'm going to go with it anyway for the sake of entertainment. It's a little like dating.
This podcast is, yep.
Where rather than ask someone out on a first date, they're like propositioning you to the bedroom on the first date. Like, I know that's not the right analogy. Forget it. Strike it. It doesn't. You don't need to actually strike it. It's just not going to work. What I'm trying to say, no, it doesn't work at all. Forget it. I tried. It's just rude, right? So it's bad negotiation skill to just hard lowball. You really should offer something more like comps. Or maybe you will say that this is the most you can afford. Right?
And then have a sob story, right?
That actually is really effective at having a warmer process. And if you're the agent submitting the low offer,
with the low
humanize
offer.
it. Yeah. You say, look, I know this offer is going to offend them, but please understand that they're not trying to be offensive. They just don't have a lot of money and they're a little stretched. Right? And so that's going to sound way more human
than
the
proof of funds comes with like a shit ton in the bank.
Than the text message I got yesterday from an agent that's like, your listing is such a POS. Oh, I'm just going to say it. Your listing is such a piece of shit. It needs to be torn down.
It's dirt
no value.
Yeah.
but I'll give you $1 million cash closing in 2 weeks. I'm like, really? Okay, first of all, it's not even an offer. It's a text message.
Yeah.
Okay. And I said to them, submit an offer, I'll present it, but it's unlikely to happen. You're asking for the sellers to take, hundreds of thousands of dollars of loss. So where do you think that's going to go? They're not desperate. And she was very condescending. I'm not going to mention who this agent is.
Of course not.
But it looks like we may have disconnected. I see trying to reconnect up there. But anyway, if you're going to play the fourth quarter find a deal game, you should be very careful in how you submit those low offers. And if you are receiving a low offer, you should also not immediately dismiss it. You should consider your options for a response. And part of that might be the intelligence that your agent gathers in learning who these people are and what is their thought process to come up with this low number. What comps did they use to come up with this low number?
Have that conversation, right? Some back and
have
forth.
the conversation. It doesn't mean you can't come to a number that everyone's happy with. And it's human nature to want to get a deal. So don't take offense as a seller. That's my advice to buyers and sellers when it comes to dealing with lowball season.
And if I could, just expanding too on that, tracking the competition, the worst thing, not the worst, right? But what you're trying to avoid there is if you miss a competitor that comes on the market, you might have just sold it for them. So you kind of need to be ready and watching the competition so you can pivot if you have to,
It doesn't mean you have to. So here's the thing.
Yeah, exactly.
Sometimes somebody's coming to market and is undercutting you because they just want to fire sale this house. And they're going to fire sale it. And during that next week to 10 days, the entire market's fixated on this discount listing that is way below market. That doesn't mean that your listing isn't worth your list price. It means your listing agent, if you hired a good one, and hint, hint, we do this, goes and sees the competition in person, not online, walks in the door and looks at the quality of the finishes and the layout, looks at the neighbors' lots, sees what's going on in this property, and then can report back with advice on whether you should make any adjustments to your marketing strategy. And good agents also solicit feedback in person. That's something we do from every single showing. I try to do it weekly. We're not perfect. Sometimes it's a 2-week thing. But typically, it's a Monday ritual for us to block time to reach out to all the agents that showed it over the weekend to try to see what they thought. And is there any constructive feedback that might be useful to share with the seller? We do that, and your agent should be doing it too. All right, let's move on to a little segment we like to call shameless self-promotion.
We've been doing a pretty good job kind of floating into it.
We've been shameful, but this is shameless.
Yes, good point.
And it's totally a tongue-in-cheek, sort of a nod of the hat to a radio show I used to love to listen to as a kid called Car Talk. And in the shameless self-promotion section, they pitch their T-shirts and their membership to Car Talk, buy their audio book, buy their actual book. And those guys were really funny, and we're not. I mean, we're not nearly as funny as Ray and Tom.
And we don't have merch to sell. We have awesome houses and great service. So
we have fantastic service, and we do have awesome houses too.
Yeah.
So one thing that I want to bring up with the shameless self-promotion segment is about open houses. And we're not going to walk you through our current listings or our current buyers, but I will say that open houses are back. And for many years, they were more or less a waste of time. And that's my take.
More or less even for the agent. Yeah.
They were almost entirely for the agent to get leads. And most buyers showed up with their own agent if they were serious about buying. It was rare that people buy houses in an open house. But it happened enough. And there was a vibe or a history of open houses that led to sellers expecting agents to offer them. And when I told most of our clients for the last 20 years that open houses are mostly a waste of time that benefits the agent, not you, I'll do it if you want me to, but let's walk through who you're likely to get in the open house. Mostly looky-loo neighbors, people that are unqualified, and
competitors.
They are super early stage, people that are going to judge you and your family portraits, and you might also get somebody that steals something, right? That's an open house. And serious buyers are going to show up with their own agent. That's what they did. But today, due to the commission rule change, that commissions can no longer be published on the MLS or on showing time.
And the pre-showing agreement too, right?
And you now have to have an agreement to show property with your agent. A lot of buyers just want to look at a house and they don't want to pick an agent until they've worked with them for a little while.
Back to your analogy, this one works. You want to date them a little bit.
This one works. You want to date for a little while before you marry someone.
Yeah.
And before you go to bed with them. For sure. You want to date a little bit. And so buyers are showing up at open houses, Hamish. And they are often not represented, and they are real buyers. So it's very well attended. So here's the other thing. 20 years ago, I could hold an open house and
get through a book.
Yeah, there might be one person that showed up, and I would read a book for 2 hours. Yeah. And the last few weeks we've been doing open houses since the NAR commission change, and they've been well attended, even on listings that are not brand new listings. They're very well attended.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a market difference, even from throwing open houses last year to now. I mean, the amount of people. Yeah, speaking of, while we're live, the forecast looks pretty good this weekend.
Oh, good. All right, well, it's Wednesday, so after the podcast, Hamish, let's have a conversation about open houses and who's hosting this weekend. The other thing to think about, and this is a good tip for you as a buyer or seller, is ask how this agent handles open houses, or attend an open house as a buyer and see how this agent, maybe you're thinking about hiring, handles an open house. And I think the right way is to highlight all the selling points, but also carefully read people, because some people don't want to have a conversation. They just want to walk through the house. They don't want to introduce themselves. And that forcing that conversation almost never results in anything positive. So
it's like walking into a store, you know, and sometimes the person's like, "Can I help you find anything?" And you're like, "No, let me be," you know.
Yeah, let me be. I just want to wander through. You should also be saying things like, "How's your day going? Welcome. Thanks for coming to the open house. Introduce yourself, friendly and warm. And are you new to the neighborhood? Are you thinking about buying here?" And if they seem standoffish, let them tour without you. So important. And ask your agent that you're thinking about hiring how they handle open houses. Also ask them how they advertise their open houses. And ask them if they actually spend money out of pocket to advertise their open house. Or are they just changing the status on the MLS and sending a few emails that cost them nothing? Ask them whether they actually spending money and how. Don't be afraid. Don't be shy. Ask them. See what they say.
Yep. Power's in the sellers and buyers. So that's
it costs so little. This is the thing, Hamish. It costs almost nothing. In a market as small as Boulder, throw a few clams at the advertising and get more people to the open house. How hard is this?
I wonder, too, how much of a difference that's made. And it's not something we want to toy with. So, I mean, we're going to keep advertising the open houses. But, I think I hope they contribute. I think they do.
I hope they contribute, too. Let's move on to sales of the week.
Perfect.
And I'm going to put this window in the right place so I'm not staring to the right. Okay. This week we have 5 properties we're going to walk you through. And the point of sales of the week are to help illustrate market conditions in specific neighborhoods. Yep.
We've got 25 minutes.
We're going to go fast. We're going to go really fast.
Okay.
I'm going to do these 60-second takes of each of these properties. And you don't need to cut any of this that you just had. We're going to go fast.
Okay.
All right. So the point is to help educate you about market conditions and specific properties. And go. The first one, Frasier Meadows, 370 Inca Parkway. This property was on the market for less than a week before it went under contract. It is a large rambling ranch on a decent-sized lot. Inca Parkway is a little busy, but the house had been updated by the former owner and was traditionally updated, so it looked okay, probably acceptable to the majority of buyers. And this segment of buyers that want a one-story ranch keeps expanding because of mobility issues. And Frasier Meadows has nice spacing between the houses and a 12,000 square foot lot should feel pretty generous. And so the house flew off the market. And likely there was a bidding war, although we don't know for sure because our clients were not involved, but they did set a submission deadline, and it did sell for $135,000 over list with a conventional fixed rate mortgage, so not a cash buyer. Bidding wars are back. Okay, next. This property, 7327 Island Circle. Hamish, did you have anything to add about the last one before I jump
Nothing.
in?
Great work.
Okay, 7327 Island Circle. Gun Barrel Country Club neighborhood. So there's actually two subdivisions in the Country Club neighborhood. There's Gun Barrel Green and Island Green. And I almost said Island Spirits because I'm thinking about a sailboat. Island Greens and Gun Barrel Greens. And this particular one is actually Island, not Gun Barrel Green. And that's actually an important distinction because Island Greens sells for
Premium.
For a premium. Yeah, this neighborhood, hang on one second. Yeah, Island Greens sells for significantly more. There's more affluent houses in Island Greens. So that's something to think about. So it was mislisted, but it did fall under contract very quickly. 3 days on market, sold for list, and boom, it was done. The house itself is a 2-story, built in the 70s, like all of the neighborhood, and had been moderately updated at some point, but really needed a lot of love. And this is a case of a buyer who acquired the property in July. They paid $1.275, and they realized less than 2 months later that this is the wrong house or the wrong neighborhood or something's not going to work. Maybe they realized that the cost to update it was way more than they could afford, or they were willing to pay, or maybe they found a better house and they just didn't do their homework. But it's really not a good idea to sell a house this fast. They did sell it for $14,000 over what they paid for it, but they certainly lost some money on commissions. Mm-hmm. And that is something to think about when you sometimes think you're getting a deal, right? Like they had negotiated a very large concession when they acquired it. The last list price was $1.35, and they paid $1.275. So they got $75,000 off the list, thinking they got a killer deal on a home that had been originally listed at $1.5. And then boom, they ended up taking a loss on it. So that's the real story on that listing. And we won't mention anything about the agents involved. Okay, moving on. Now, we don't often talk about Denver, but we do cover it. And this property is 1537 South Ogden Street, listed at $1.295, sold for $1.28. The neighborhood is called Platt Park. I pay attention to this neighborhood because, well, my in-laws are there, but I also like Denver neighborhoods, and I've noticed how up and coming this neighborhood is, how it's been improved by new owners in the last decade. The homes have gotten better and remodeled and nice, and there's interesting retail nearby, there's an interesting park nearby, and it's a solid neighborhood, a little bit impacted by traffic noise. And what's interesting about this particular historic, well, it's not pre-war, but it's built in 1969 bungalow, is that it was soup to nuts remodeled. Mm-hmm. And it's been given a very modern look with all this dark paint on the outside and white high contrast on the inside, some accent walls, but soup to nuts looks completely remodeled. And my only comment on this is that there's some weirdness to this house. Like it's aesthetically pleasing, but I think this black paint is going to age really poorly. And what was the front driveway is now a little patio with trees growing through it, and they built a detached garage in the back. I would be very cautious buying a home that was in a color scheme like this, and some of our clients have sold homes that have interesting color schemes and have gone with the high contrast look because it's a popular look. And I have lost the window, Hamish. I can't look at the property anymore.
Well,
so clearly it's time to move on. There it is. Hold on. I just had to move the window a little bit.
Alt-tab.
So I don't think it was a flip, but let's look at the history really quick. And I mean, it was acquired in 2019, so not exactly a flip, but has a lot of flippery look to it. Probably not a flip. I didn't see this house in person, but the thing that I think is hits the red flag button is the paint scheme, but paint's easily fixed, so shouldn't dissuade you. and fantastic neighborhood. And again, only sold for $15,000 below list. And
Painted
on the market,
brick.
not. Yeah, be careful painting brick. You should watch some YouTube videos. Okay, next property, 2391. Oh, Hamish, did you have anything to add?
Nope, that's it. The painted brick one. You got it.
Okay. 2391 High Lonesome Trail in Lafayette, Indian Peaks. There's a couple of distinctions in Indian Peaks to think about with regard to schools, but this particular house is one-story ranch built in the 90s and moderately sized. So you have 2,300 square feet that are on the main, and then a pretty generously sized basement, 3-car garage. And even though it's not blow your mind in terms of the updates, it's sort of 2000 era updates, maybe even a lot of original finishes. It was priced right, and it's a decent sized family house because of aging population and a whole bunch of other things. Single story ranch style houses sell very quickly, and this is sort of the medium bowl of porridge size. So listed at 1.2, on the market 2 weeks, and yet it's still closed above list for 1.216. And there was, interestingly, so that's a cash. So it's not a cash deal. So it's sold for more than list. But here's why you have to look into the details. It actually had a $28,000 concession, which was described as just a cash concession, not necessarily inspection related. But because the sale price was higher than list after 2 weeks, typically what you're looking at is a buyer who is getting some of their closing costs paid, right? Like you bump the list price above, you bump the sale price above list, and then you claw back $26,000,
Get a little
$28,000 to get some of your closing costs paid. So that's interesting as a transaction, but I'm sure the seller is quite happy. They got pretty much close to their list price, and it closed 44 days after hitting the market. All right, last one, and this is probably the most interesting one.
My one comment. It's one of those big roof homes. Got a huge roof on them from the front. All right. Number 5.
Okay, hopefully this speed is entertaining, not annoying.
You're really hitting some good notes, so.
I really wanted to talk about this property for an extended period of time because it's in my neighborhood at 100 Chrisman in Boulder County off of 4 Mile. Chrisman is a historic town that was originally a mining camp and became a boom town in the late 1880s. And then there was a major flood. Of course, there was the crash of the silver and gold markets, and then there was a major flood that destroyed most of that town of Chrisman. And then there's still a handful of homes, including this one, which was built in 1893, which is 1 year before that major flood, and it survived. So it does appear to be in the 100-year flood. You wouldn't know that by the listing because it's not required to be disclosed. They used Colorado, so it's a Denver listing agent, not a Boulder listing agent. And Colorado doesn't require flood zone, but this is in the 100-year flood. And it was on the market only 10 days, priced at just under $600. A little 2-bed, 1-bath, with half an acre of land, like sort of mining cabin, right? That's what this is a historic cabin. And because it was priced so generously, despite not having views, and despite being in the flood zone, and despite also having extreme fire risk because it's in the mountains, it sold for only $15,000 below list. And I gotta say, I wonder if the buyer knew all those things going in, and I hope they did. But this is like the mountain fantasy house, right? You've got this adorable little house in the mountains, and it's a second home, and in the summers or maybe in the fall, you use it in the fall, and it's cute. I mean, it's a really cute little cabin. Virtual staging, Hamish, what do you think of the virtual staging?
Well, I think the staging, quote unquote, in the backyard is generative AI removing it. I think that's actually in there. But what's I didn't notice to begin with is it has finished space above the garage too. So you've got your own little separate kind of sleep out or, whatever you want to do with it up there. That's neat, actually.
Yeah, almost certainly built without a permit.
No doubt. We're in the mountains now.
It's the mountains. If that's a permitted finish above the garage, I would be shocked. With a wood stove, I think there's almost 0% chance that space is actually allowed to be living space, but that doesn't mean that people don't live there.
Also, the fence is on the wrong side of the home proper. It's funky on the driveway thing, but this is pretty in line for what you see in this area.
Yeah, that's an internal fence for like a dog, almost certainly.
That makes sense.
So interesting. I mean, it's super cheap, right? You're under 600, and and hopefully you don't get flooded or burned. But okay, so that's our last one. Interesting deal. And that property had been owned for probably a really long time by the seller. Yeah, I mean at least 2016. So all right, 8 years. All right, that's our last of the
sales.
Of our sales of the week.
Okay.
That leaves, I think, just one more segment, Hamish, and we have precisely 15 minutes, but we really need a momentary break. I guess we have two sections. We have a little in the
cover
news.
It. Yeah.
Let's cover it. It's so much fun. Let's cover it. So we're going this fast, by the way, because we have a client meeting, and we need to wrap this up. All right. You want to read it, Hamish? I've been doing all the talking as usual.
Yeah, you found this article, but we do team dinners at House Einstein, and this is for the foodie listeners out there. A revolving sushi bar that serves sushi on small trays is coming to Boulder. Daily Camera article from Jonathan Sykes, and it looks like I can only listen to it. And I'm not subscribed, so back to you, Oz.
All right, so if you've ever been to Japan or enjoyed a sushi train restaurant on the east or west coast, that's what this is. And sushi trains are just fun. The food kind of arrives on a conveyor belt, and you choose from plates going by what you want. You see little plates of sushi, and then at the end of the meal, they charge you by the number of plates and the color of the plates that you chose. And so is it a gimmick? Absolutely. But it's also fun and playful. Mm-hmm. And apparently this sushi train thing is now exploding in the U.S. and this company has chosen Boulder as its next location. It's going to be in the 29th Street Mall. And
nice.
Absolutely everyone in Boulder is going to go to Sushi Train. And even though the name of the place is Kuro Revolving Sushi Bar, everyone's just going to call it Sushi Train because that's what happens with these restaurants. So we're excited, but you got to wait a year because it's not opening up until 2025.
You know how you can order like a sushi boat? Do you think you can get a boat train? Food for thought.
I don't think so.
I don't think so either, but fun thought. We're doing
all right, our
now.
Carveout section. The Carveout. Hamish, what's been on your mind?
Impulse purchases. I came back from my road trip and said to myself, I'm done spending on my car that is very expensive, so I'll save. And of course my phone heard that and said, here's some highly personalized ads. So I'm into videography and photography, and I got served an ad at like 11:30 at night on Instagram, and
at a moment of weakness.
Oh man, it happened so quickly.
And look how cheap this lens is.
Yeah, exactly. I got this. I don't know if it's good, but I have a tilt shift lens on its way. It hasn't. I don't have an ETA yet, but the shipping label's been created, and it gets here I think on the 18th. Is the estimate?
And you're excited about this.
Oh, I'm stoked. Yeah, and I'm like genuinely really excited to kind of play with it and everything. It's a lens kind of made for full frame, so it's a 50 millimeter lens, and if you're into this stuff, then you'll know. But if not, it's got it's like a portrait lens, so it looks pretty good if you're taking portraits of people. But I'm on a micro four thirds platform, which effectively doubles the focal length, so I will have 100 millimeter, almost a telephoto tilt shift lens, and I have no idea how that's going to look. But it should be fun.
Well, and for the record, you also use Canon RF full frame, but yes,
this lens is camera.
So how is tilt shift different than just a fast lens that blurs out the background?
I genuinely am not 100% sure of the physics of light at play, but I have an inkling that it kind of shifts the focus plane across the sensor, And so instead of kind of having a direct 90, you can kind of add like diagonal focus, depth of field to the image. Sounds right.
I mean, what I've noticed is it makes everything look like the entry to Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, where you see like a miniature version. Like there's like a visual effect that makes everything look like toys.
Yeah, it's got like this miniaturization effect, and the ad that got me was like starry night photo of these kind of gorgeous alpine mountains, and then the Milky Way over top. So I want to see if I can recreate that shot. We'll see.
Cool.
Yeah. That's about it.
All right.
I just
I can't wait to see these images. I don't think they'll have a work purpose, but I'm still fascinated to see what you do with it. So
if there's a cool use case, but yeah, who knows?
All right. I like the creativity. And then for me, the Carveout has been bicycle brake rebuilding. So we're back to Zen and the art of bicycle maintenance. And I was out mountain biking with my beloved, and she said, "Boy, these brakes are sticking." And then she said the handles aren't flipping back, and I was like, okay. And then we rode a little more, and she's like, and now one brake's not working at all. And I'm like, okay, well, we live in the mountains. I need to fix this if I expect her to ride with me. And I ended up rebuilding the front handles, the pistons of both of her front and back brakes, and it was like just a puzzle of pieces. I've worked on vehicles my whole life. I mean, since I was probably 12 years old, I've been monkeying with vehicles of various types, starting with bicycles and then onward, actually starting with Matchbox cars. As
just the DIY though, right? Like all that. Yeah.
Fascinated with all vehicles, or things that fly or float, and not the last F. And so
great podcast, everyone.
taking apart the master cylinder is what it is, right? There's only one cylinder though. There's no secondary cylinder. Taking apart the cylinder, and putting in that new piston and new rings that are rubber seals, and everything was just in miniature. It's like I almost need like magnifying lenses,
like a loop.
Yeah, like the size of the fasteners are so small. Oh, yeah. I had to order Torx fasteners that are. I've got Torx tools for the motorcycles, but the Torx tools for bicycles are T10 is the largest of the Torx that I was using. No, actually there was one larger, but there was like a T9, and then I need like it's just tiny. I literally was using tweezers to put parts in and out. And then the circ clip that held that piston in was so small. I went through 4 different types of snap ring pliers to try to find the right solution. And at the end of the day, what worked was the tip of this Irwin tool. Like it's like a scissoring mechanism that comes off the top of the plier, and you take that top off, and now I could just using that and then a pair of channel locks to articulate it was what I used to get into that, to get the circlips, the snap rings out. And it was an exercise in frustration, but they're now done, and hopefully she'll ride with me again. And also it just feels good to get bicycles working the way they should.
Yeah, I'm gonna just drop my bike off with you.
No. Negative.
Worth a shot.
Negative.
Worth a shot.
Negative. Maybe once everything is fully maintained and I'm caught up on years years of neglected bike maintenance, then I'll think about it. It's not a hard no. It's just a not for now. No for now.
No for now.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. And with that, I want to thank you, dear listeners, for joining us at the House Einstein podcast. If you'd like to learn more about what we do here in Colorado, you can visit us at houseeinstein.com. We deeply appreciate your comments, you taking time to listen to us, hopefully entertain you, hopefully not offend you too badly. I tried. And we'll catch you next time. Hamish, any last thing to add?
Check us out on YouTube, House Einstein on YouTube. We have good listings and neighborhood tours and all sorts of stuff.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
All right. We'll see you next time.